Hi, this is Joe Bolen, and welcome to learning about VisualBasic.net. In the last video, we concentrated on understanding what a class is in Visual Basic's object-oriented programming. We talked about properties, we talked about constructors, and all the different things that a class can do. Well, in this video, we're going to actually create a class in code and utilize it by putting our class, our user-defined class, of data into an array. Normally in an array we think of putting in an integer or a string. We're going to put in our class. In this case it's going to be called the student class. So let's learn about how to code for a class, learning about properties, the constructor, and we'll also look at the override of the toString function in our class, and then we'll see how to consume it and use it. So let's get into our code and learn about our student class demo. Okay, I have on my screen the Windows Designer area of Visual Basic, and I've got a form already designed called Student Class Demo, and I've got two text boxes for first and last name. Also, I have three buttons, an Add Student, Clear, and Display Student buttons on my form. Now, as I enter in data into the form, I want to then click on the Add Student and put it into my array that I'm collecting of students. If I make a mistake and I want to erase something, I'll hit the Clear button. And after I start to have some students in my array, then I want to be able to hit the Display Students button and display all the students that I have in my array. Now, one of the things a little bit different here is the Display Student button. I'm going to click on it so you can see this. I have changed it from its normal default of being enabled to false. I don't want the Display Students button to be available until I have at least one student added into my array. And the other thing is, as we progress through the adding of students, when my array is full, I want to turn off by making enable for the Add Student button false so that I can't add any more students than my array is dimensioned for. Now, I've already created the events for this, so let's click on the buttons. I'll go to the Clear event, and we'll start adding in our different events that we're going to work with. But before we get started, let me take you up to the top here where our documentation information's at. For the screen that you just saw, it's at Imager, and this is the location for that. Then we'll see also a display summary screen that's out there as well. So these are the two screens that you'll see for this program. And the code that I'm creating in this video is at Pastebin at this location. So you can go out and study the code in more detail, pull it into your own environment, maybe modify it or try it out for your own education and modification. And of course, other videos that I create are out at Bolen Presents at youtube.com. So if you'd like to pause your video at this time and write down the URLs to those locations, please do so. Or come back and review it and go out later on and take a look at the code. Well, let's get into the code itself. You'll see I have the basic structure set up. I've got the form called Student Form. I've got the default option strict on. And I've declared it here explicitly. You can do it also in the tool settings, but I've set it here so you'll see that I do have it on. As this program runs, it'll have the effect of option strict on as we run it. Now let's take a look at the Clear button. The first thing we're going to do with the Clear button is clear out our text boxes. So we have a very simple thing we're going to do here, but I'm going to be clearing out the text box area in more than one spot, not just the Clear button. So I'm going to actually create a subroutine that I'll call to clear out the text boxes. So what I'm going to do here in the Clear button area is just call the routine I'm going to create in a second. We're going to call reset text boxes. And that's going to be our one that we're going to call. Then I'm going to come right down below it and actually create the routine. Private sub reset text boxes. I can type. There we go. And what I'm going to do in the reset text boxes routine is I'm going to take the first name text box and I'm going to issue the clear method and also the last name text box and issue the clear method on it as well. And then I want to put my cursor back into the first name text box for data entry. So I'll do first name text box focus, and that'll put my cursor back into that area. Need to spell right. Focus. There we go. So that'll take care of our little section below here. That'll take care of clearing our text boxes and focus when I hit the clear button or when I call this procedure by itself from another area. Okay, let's go to our add button area. We're going to be wanting to add a student with a student ID, a first name and a last name. So we are going to need a couple things to start out with. One of the things I'm going to start out with, since we're going to be putting this in an array, is I'll need to have some way to keep track of how many I'm adding. So I'm going to declare at the class level the following information here. I'm going to make a private, and this one will be student count as integer, and I'm going to initialize it to 0, although it'll do it automatically. And then I'm going to create an array called students, and I'm going to dimension it to hold 5 elements. So I put a 4 there, and so it'll hold 4 elements on that, and we'll say as a student class. And you'll see in a minute I'll create the class. Right now it doesn't have it, and that's why I'm getting a little error right now. We'll create it in a second here. So now let's create our class for our students to go in there. Normally we create maybe integers or strings. This is going to be a user-defined kind of element. We're going to be putting in our 5 elements in our student array. And so what I'm going to do is come over to the Solution Explorer. I'm going to click on the project and then right-click and select Add. And then I'll have Add Class. It'll pop up and you'll see I have class highlighted here. And I'm going to add the student class. And there is our student class that we're going to be working with. And at that point you'll see that as I go back to my form that I was working with, this is now okay and the error's gone away. So let's go to our student class and define our student. Now what I'm going to be doing here is what's called auto-implemented properties on that, because we're going to get it started real quickly, and then we'll come back in another video and define our properties a little bit more specifically, and you'll see even more the power of our properties and the use of our student class. So the first thing I want to have in here is a public property, and that property is going to be student ID as an integer. The next property I'm going to have is another public property, so it's accessible, and this will be first name as string. And the last one I'm going to put in here is public property last name as string. Now we could put in grade point average and other things that would be part of the student, but this will get us started out with a very simple structure so we can learn about classes. Now one of the things we also have, even though we haven't created here, is there is actually internally a constructor that's been created that when we call to instantiate make the blueprint of our student class into memory, we issue the student new method. And so I could leave this blank, but I'm going to put it in so that we'll see later on about some overloads that we'll have for that method. So I'm going to say public sub new. And that's all I need there, and that's our default constructor, and I think I'll document it real quickly and say that. Okay, so we got our default constructor, and I'm going to also do another thing. I'm going to enter in a function in here. Our class can have not only properties and the method, in this case of the sub new, but we can also have functions. And so I'm going to put in the public function, but I'm going to override it because already in this class at the base level is a toString function, and I'm going to override it for this class. So I'm going to say overrides function, and the function is toString, and you'll see it pops real quickly in there. I'm going to turn out the MyBase and change it to what I would like it to return. And I'm going to have it return a little string here, string format. And in this format, I'm going to have student ID. And in the student ID, we'll have a position here, the first one. And I'm going to make this a 3-digit student ID. So I'll use D3. And then I'll say is, and then I'll have the first name in there. And space, and then the last name. Get my brackets and things set. Okay, then I'm going to put in the variables that I'll be passing into that, and that'll be the student ID, and I'll be passing in the first name and last name. There we go. So we've got our 3 properties using the auto-implemented version of the properties. We've got our default constructor declared, and we've got our simple toString override so that we can see what our student ID, first name and last name is for our particular entry we have in our student class. Okay, let's save that. Now let's come back to our form, and now we're going to take advantage of that student we just created. So one of the first things I'm going to do here as I begin to add a student is I first have to dimension or declare a student to be used. So I type in dim, and I'm going to call it add student because we're going to be adding the student. And it's going to be as, and here's where I'm going to use the new constructor, new student. And that will then make it available to me so that I can now reference those properties that I have within my class. So what we're going to do is take add student, and I'll hit the access method, and you'll see that I have student ID available to me. And I'm going to assign to the student ID our student count, but I'm going to offset it by 1. So I'm going to take student count and add 1 to it. So instead of starting out with 0, I'll have actually a 1 for our student ID. I'm going to take the add student, and I'm going to use the first name property, and to that I'm going to bring in my text box from my form. So I'm going to do first name text box, bringing in the text property, assigning it to my class, and then I'm going to do an add student last name, and also I'm going to assign the last name text box its text property to the last name. So now I've created a student with the declaring an add student. It's going to be of a student type, which we declared in our class. We then go access the properties, and we're setting the values of student ID, first name and last name, with the values that we want to place into it. Okay, at that point, we're ready to take care of adding our student to our array. So I'm going to document real quickly that we're going to be doing that. Add student to array. And we're going to basically take our student array, our students array that we've declared up here. We're going to reference the element with the student count. So we reference our first element will be 0 when we start out with 0. And we're going to assign to it, in this case, our add student. And so our user-defined class gets assigned to that first element. Now, after I have my first element in place, then I need to increment my counter. So I'm going to take student count, and I'm going to add 1 to increment it. And at that point, my display student button, can now be enabled. So I set it to true, because now I have a student element filled out in my array. So I've got that done, and that completes processing through on that. Now, one thing I need to watch out for, though, is as I keep adding students, I don't want to exceed the number of elements that I have declared. So what I need to do is do a quick conditional check if the student count is greater than the number of elements on that, because I'm going to go to students. I'm going to get to the get upper bounds, and just let me highlight what the get upper bounds is. It is the index of the last element of the specified dimension in the array. So since we have 5 elements in there, it's going to return back the position on that. So we're also going to have to tell it the rank we're using, and it's going to be a one-dimensional, so we put a 0 in there on that. If that is been exceeded, we do not want to add anymore. So what we're going to do is turn off our add button. Add student button enabled, and we're going to turn it on to false, and that'll shut off our button as we proceed through there. Okay, that's all it takes to get that set to go. So we're taking care of creating a brand new class, user-defined class. We're then assigning to the properties our different values from our form. We're then taking that new student and adding it to the element of our student array. Then we're incrementing our count and turning on our display button so we can display our students later on. Then we're also making certain that I can't add any more. If I've now got more array than I have available in my dimension, I'll turn off my add button. Okay, that takes care of that. Now the next part is displaying our array, and for that we want to do a little bit different. What I'm going to do is come up to the top and import what's called the system text on that. So I'm going to do an import statement to make it easier to get references. So import system text. And we're going to use that for what's called the StringBuilder class. And you'll see as I add this in here in the StringBuilder class, we're going to be able to reference it much easier. So I'm going to declare dim a variable called output as new StringBuilder, and there's the StringBuilder coming in, and I'm going to initialize it with a string. So I'm going to say student listing, and then I'm going to add a couple of new line characters. By concatenating the new line characters to it on that. So that creates the header part of our output. Then I'm going to go through each element in my array to process outputting that information. So I'm going to take a for loop for idx as integer. That'll be my reference to the subscript of my array. And I'm going to go from 0 to student count -1. Okay? Because remember, at the end of my sequence, I'll have a number a little bit higher than my amount that I have, so I'm keeping track of my student count. Now, as I do that, I'm going to take the output variable. I'm going to do a append line to it, and in the append line, I'm going to take the student array. I'm going to take the index of that on that. And because that will be of the student data type, I'm going to then just use the toString to have it present. Now, since I have that all done, I have now output the detailed lines of each part of our array. Then I'm going to use the message box to display it. So I'll say message box show. And what we're going to do is show the output to string. And then I'm going to use the title of my form on there. And after I display it and the dialog box closes, I want to position my cursor back in to the area that I'm working with. So what I will be doing then is setting my cursor back into the first name text box. So all I need to do is do first name text box dot focus. Whoops. There we go. So that takes care of processing our output. We're using the StringBuilder on that to build it up. It's much better for concatenation of information. We're then retrieving each array element in our students array, and because each element is of our student class, we're using our toString method that we defined in our student class to be part of the output. Okay, let's see if we've got everything set here. I'm going to check one last part that I might have missed on that, and I did. The last thing under student count after I've added a student is I want to reset the text boxes. So I'm going to reset text boxes there. So as we come through and we've added a student to our array, then I want to clear out my display for the next student to be added. Okay, well there we go. Let's give it a run and see how well it works. Okay, there's our form on that, and I'm going to put in myself to begin with, and I'm going to tab and hit Add Student, And you'll see now that the Display Student button is now been enabled, and I can actually hit the Display Student at this point in time. And you'll see our message box says student listing colon student ID colon 001 is Joe Bolen, and that's exactly what we want to have happen. Let's add a few more and make certain that we don't exceed that array problem. So let's add another one. Let's add a third one. Fourth one. Now let's take a look where we are right now. We've got 4 added in. Let's add our 5th one. Gee, I'm running out of names here to think about. And now the add button has been disabled because it can only hold 5 in an array as we defined it, 5 elements. So there we go. We can keep displaying it, but I can't add anymore because I've disabled the button. And we've got the output with our toString function that we've created in our student class. All right, there we go. Now let's review what we've learned thus far on that. Our form was just a simple form on that where we had 2 text boxes and 3 buttons on there. And we disabled the Display Student button to start out with because we don't have any elements filled yet in our array. Then we created a student class using the auto implements on that, and we had 3 properties. I could have had another property, maybe grade point average as a decimal or a whole number or whatever we could create here. And I can have other constructors, but here's our toString, and I had to use the overrides. Without the overrides, this will not work because there is a default toString method to our class that begins with. So we have to override the default with the override keyword to our function. And then we're formatting our output with the string format function, or I should say method here, to take care of outputting our data. Then going back to our form itself and processing it, we have our student count we're keeping track of. We start out with 0. We declared it only for 5 students to make it easy for this presentation. And then as I go through, I first instantiate with the new keyword my student class. After I instantiate it, I can then reference it. And here you see I can reference the properties on that, and I'm putting in the information into those properties. Then I'm taking that student class, user-defined class, and assigning it to the elements in the student array. In this case, it'll be based off of whatever my student count is at the time. Then I'm incrementing the student count. I'm going to just turn on the Display Student button since I'll have at least 1 in there at that point. Then I'm going to make certain that I don't exceed the number of elements that I have in my array. And then I'm going to, if I do have more coming in than I have in my array, I want to turn off that Add Student button's ability to be clicked on by making it a false value for the enable. And then I'm going to reset the text boxes for the next time I add another one. Our output uses simple StringBuilder, and I use the import statement system.text to make this easier to reference. And I declared a variable called output. I initialized it with the header information. I used 2 new lines to get some spacing. Then I looped through my array using the overridden toString method of our user-defined class to present it to us. Then I used the message box show dialog to output the information to our screen for us to see the different students we've added in there. And of course our clear button is very simple clear area that we've taken care of on that. So that gives you an idea of how to do things. Now we've just touched base with this. The next video we're going to create and deal with is taking that student class and making it a little bit more robust. We're going to implement in some business logic into that class. We're going to say you must have a first name and you must have a last name, and your student ID must be greater than 0. So we're going to enforce some rules into what we can add into our class. And then if we have a problem with those rules being violated, we're going to throw a message, exception message, back to our user interface and say, hey, you've got to fill out this stuff with the right information so that I get the correct data before I process it any further. And so we'll add that robust quality of checking for the values that we're putting into our user-defined class. So this gets us started. We're using auto implements to get us up and running very quickly. It doesn't have any checks to see if things are correct. It just says these are the different properties that we're going to be working with in our class. We created a very simple override toString to display the information we have in our class. And we can create anything we'd like to display in that override of the toString in that method. So take a look at that. Remember, we can go back out to our site and take a look at our code that we've created out there. So go out to Pastebin at this site to take a look at the code and watch the next video where we're going to add a little bit more to our code to make it a much more robust code, and you'll see the power of the user-defined class being used, and you'll discover it is a real nice thing to have and take advantage of. And it's because we create a good class, we can use it in other projects, and it becomes like a nice little black box we can bring in and use elsewhere. So until next time, take care, get your hands dirty in the code, and be good.